Hi, Studio Arts. So this is your second project. This is a project about rubbings. It's maybe something that you did when you were younger with leaves, but we're going to look at this in a conceptual way. And first, we're going to see the work of an artist named Do Hosa, who does a lot of work dealing with home. And he's had many different homes. He was born in Korea. He studied on the East Coast of the US, and now he lives in London. And so we're going to see how he addresses home and spaces he's lived in.
I have a mutual friend who was giving up this flat, and so I took it. I never lived anywhere else in New York City. This is the first and the last place. I had an interview with my landlord. They heard that I'm an artist. They were really concerned. They were not sure whether I could actually pay the rent. But they let me live here. It was my living space and studio for 18 years. My artistic career started from here. But the whole process is to remember the space and also somehow memorialize the space. Whoever is going to buy this place is going to renovate this space and everything is going to go. It is quite a meaningful place for the family and also for me. I've been moving around since I left Korea. I'm living in London now. It's a constant recalibration. I try to understand my life as a movement through different spaces. You can do this as well. No, don't worry. I know. Yeah.
I know. I
Yeah.
just fixed it.
Yeah. After this project is done and peeled away from the space, I'll probably pack it and show it somewhere in the future. It's a bit difficult to take it off from the objects, but once you do that carefully, it still contains the shape of the object. I was constantly seeking some other means to capture the information of the space that was lacking from my fabric version. When I discovered it by rubbing, it just brought the memories associated with those details. And there's hundreds of thousands of it. When I did fabric version of this space, Arthur, the landlord, he was supporting my project emotionally. I don't know how much he understood what I was doing back then, but he always let me do crazy things in this space. If I write rubbing in Korean, people could read it as a loving, because there's no distinction between R and L in Korean alphabet. I think the gesture of rubbing is very loving gesture. So I made the connection between rubbing and the loving, and that's how the title came about. My energy has been accumulated, and in a way I think my rubbing shows that. The darker area doorknobs and locks, that's the objects that you touch every time, and just imagine how many times that I actually flipped that light switch when I was living in here for 18 years. I'm I'm trying to show that layers of time. From the distance, it looks like a drawing. As you get closer, it becomes very sculptural and three-dimensional. There's a point where it sort of changes from two-dimensional to three-dimensional. Arthur, he was suffering with Alzheimer's disease. A few months before he passed away, I made a special effort to see him. He warned me that he may not remember me. I was prepared for that, but we end up talking 2 hours. So at the end of the day, I asked him to come down to see what we were doing. I showed him around, and then he said, "Oh, there's nothing much to see," which is understandable. But then he sat down and told me, "You're welcome to do whatever you want to do in this house." And I was almost going to burst into tears because that's exactly what he told me, 13 years ago when I was measuring the hallway 4 o'clock in the morning because I didn't want to disturb other people. He came down so quietly and then saw me measuring the cord, and he said, "What are you doing?" And I tried to explain, about the project, but he said the exact same thing. Do whatever you want to do.
So the next artist is Jennifer Bernstein, and she did a series of encaustic rubbings to capture the tactile textures of personal objects from her father's daily life. And this is his left hiking boot. She likes to make inventories of things. So in this case, it was an inventory of clothing, books, 16 millimeter film, vintage cameras, cassette tapes, and various other objects that she rubbed did a rubbing of with blue pigment over a thick kozo paper. And kozo is very similar to the paper you have. In fact, the paper you have is comprised of, even though it's called sumi paper, or sometimes people know it as rice paper, it often has kozo in it, which is a very strong plant that you can make very thin paper with, but that has these long fibers that keep the strength of the paper intact. And this is an image of an installation she did with many of the objects that she did rubbings of from her father's life, so including clothing and equipment and different things that helped to remind her and sort of make this collection of who he was. So now I'm going to show you a demonstration of me just taking rubbings off of some objects around my house. You're going to be required to do 1 to 2 full pages of the kozo paper, of the sumi paper that you received in your kit. And that is the thin paper. If you don't have that, other papers will work. Just good old printer paper should do fine. And then you're going to experiment. I recommend using the Conte crayon, and then also the side, some of the colored pencils. If you have a nice sharp point on them and use the side of them, So there's a lot of things that you can find to do rubbings of. Here I have a key that I found in a drawer, and I'm using the Conte crayon on its side to pick up the texture and shape of the key. And you can also use those colored pencils that we have, and just kind of like the Doho Sub video that you saw, just use the pencil on its side, make sure it has a nice point. And it's really great for picking up details. Both do a great job, but in very, very different ways. And just go slow, and I want you to fill a page with rubbings from things you find around your home. It can be the walls, it can be textures, it can be shapes. Here I am doing the coil on my stove. If you have an electric range and you have one of these, please make sure if you decide to do this one that you make sure that it is not even the least bit hot, and that it's okay that you put a piece of paper on top. But there's lots of other textures around the home. I just kind of went through my kitchen and a little bit in my office, and so this is actually a file folder from my office that has this sort of graded texture to it. And go light. If you tear the paper, no big deal. Just put a piece of tape on the back to hold it together. But try not to tear it, because we will eventually, the goal is to be able to use these for our kites later on. So you're going to make 1 to 2 sheets full of rubbings from around your house. Here's a pegboard that I have that picked up a nice texture. But 1 to 2 sheets full of rubbings, that is you're going to use the Kozo paper. So that is the long roll that you have. It's the thinner paper, but it's very strong. And you have about 12 sheets. So you just use 1 or 2 for this. And then upload all of your rubbings to the website. We'll be able to get a nice rubbing. So your 1 to 2 full sheets, I want you to cover the whole page with different rubbings. Your 1 to 2 full sheets of rubbings are due next Monday, March 30th by 8:15 a.m. That is a change in our schedule. And we are having a full school schedule change. So I'm changing the way that we do projects. And so you'll receive a project prompt every Monday. And then the following Monday or Tuesday, depending on when your class is, you will have a critique. But all projects are due Monday, March 30th by 8:15 a.m.